Hey everyone, thank you so much for tuning into this video. And today I've got a great demo for you. I'm going to demonstrate the Tailscale operator for Kubernetes. And this is a brand new piece of functionality that the Tailscale dev team have just released into beta this very day. And so although I'm sitting in Amsterdam, I have my iPad here with me, and I'm going to connect back to my dev environment in Seattle using Tailscale, and I'm going to do a demo of the Tailscale operator for Kubernetes. So let's jump onto the iPad and get going here. So the first thing to do is to make sure that Tailscale is connected, and this is because I'm in Amsterdam and I need to connect to my dev box in Seattle. So we'll make sure Tailscale is connected. Then we'll go into Blink, which is the terminal emulator, and now I'm going to connect using the Mosh protocol. It's a version of SSH. I'm going to use that to connect back to ClarkZone DevBox 5, which is my dev box running in Seattle. Because I'm on Tailscale, I can do that, and it connects just fine. So let's have a quick look at the environment. So to prove that I'm on my dev box, let's just look at the host name quickly. And we can see that's ClarkZone DevBox 5. And then in terms of what we have locally, we can just see one shell script here, update secrets.sh. And one last thing to look at is what Tailscale operators are already running. And so to do that, I'm going to just query the status and search for operator instances. And I can see there's actually an existing Tailscale operator running on my tailnet. And this is actually one that I use in production. So that's essentially already there. In terms of my Kubernetes cluster, well, what have I got? Let's have a little quick look at my context. You can see I've got 4 different clusters here. These are all back in Seattle alongside my dev box under my desk. And at the moment, I'm attached to RARPi-C2. And you can see that it's got 3 nodes. Those are each compute module 4s. And if we have a quick look at the namespaces, you can see it's just the defaults. These are just the K3S out-of-the-box defaults. So to make it a little bit easier to type, I've set up an alias for kubectl, which is the K character. And so anytime I type K, I'm going to get kubectl. All right, so let's jump over and look at the instructions for the Tailscale operator. So I'm just going to search for those instructions and pull them up in the browser. And if we have a little look through, there's a little bit of setup that needs to happen here. And the first thing that we need to do is to make some changes to the Tailscale policy file and also create an OAuth client. And these are things that I've actually already gone and done in my admin dashboard. And so if we have a quick look in here, we can see under access controls that I've got the relevant operator access set up, as well as I've created an OAuth client as well. And so with that, what I need to do next is to grab the operator manifest file from the Tailscale repo. So I'm going to jump across to that operator.yaml, and I'm going to copy a link to the raw manifest, and I'm then going to download that onto the dev box so that I can modify it. So just quickly curl that down, and then we can go in and make a few changes. So I'm going to come into operator.yaml, I'm going to edit it, and I'm going to make a couple of changes. The first thing I'm going to do is the container image that the operator manifest is pulling from, I actually want to version lock that to the specific version I tested it with. This was very kindly provided for me for testing by Mason, one of the devs at Tailscale. And so I'm going to come in and just lock the container image to that particular version tag that I know is going to work. And I'm doing that for both images, both the operator image and the Tailscale image, which is used for the Tailscale proxy. And then I'm going to go in and change the name of this operator instance so that we can distinguish the demo instance from the one that I showed earlier. And so I'm just going to append demo to the name of this instance here in the environment. Now what I'm going to do is come in and take a little look at the instructions, and I have to provide a client ID and client secret for that OAuth credential. And then I need to apply the manifest to the Kubernetes cluster. So to do the credential update, I'm going to use this script, update secrets, and that's just going to inject the values that I've set in the environment. And then the operator file is ready. I'm applying it to the cluster, and now we're ready to take a look at that operator manifest getting applied. And so if we have a little look, we can now see there's a new namespace, Tailscale. And we also, if we look at our tailnet with Tailscale status, we can actually see a second operator instance. And if you look very closely, you can see that it's labeled demo. So at this point, we've gone and looked at the instructions and we've downloaded the Tailscale operator for Kubernetes YAML manifest. We've modified it and we've applied it to the Kubernetes cluster running back in Seattle. So the next step is let's actually deploy a couple of container workloads into the cluster and show how the Tailscale operator for Kubernetes will automatically take the service or ingress definitions and use that to map these into my tailnet such that I can actually get into those workloads from my cluster from anywhere on my tailnet. And that's the really cool part. So let's jump back and go and install some workloads. Okay, so let us do a test, and we're going to use a deployment manifest that I created earlier to test out the Tailscale operator for Kubernetes. And in this manifest, we have a simple deployment of an Nginx web server and a corresponding service. And you can see here this interesting load balancer class attribute that has been added. And this is the magic that enables the Tailscale operator for Kubernetes to do the right thing. So if we just grab a link to this manifest and we curl it down onto the dev box, we can then apply it to the cluster and see what happens. So let's now just do an apply to that downloaded manifest that we just looked at. And you can see here that it's now created a namespace, a deployment, and a service. So if we get the contents of the namespace and just look, we can confirm that everything is there. So you can see there's the pods, there's the service, and there's the deployment. So what's happened on the Tailscale side? Well, if we do a quick Tailscale status and we search for Nginx, we'll see that there's actually a new tag device on our tailnet that is Tailscale test Nginx Tailscale. And moreover, if we have a look at the services, you can see that the external DNS name has been created for this service that matches that tailnet entry. And if we go over into the browser and paste that domain name in, you'll see there is our Nginx server coming from our Kubernetes cluster. And we can confirm that if we disconnect the tailnet and then refresh the browser page, no longer does anything connect from my iPad. My iPad is sat in Amsterdam and it's not on the tailnet. We reconnect the tailnet and now again it's seeing that service on the Kubernetes cluster back in Seattle. So there is one caveat here, and that is if you look closely at the browser address bar, you can see that actually this is not a secure connection. You can see it is not using TLS for the browser to connect to the Kubernetes cluster. And the reason for this is that the Tailscale operator for Kubernetes, when targeting a Kubernetes service, does not do a secure SSL terminated connection. To do that, we actually need to do a different thing. We need to use a different modality of the Tailscale operator for Kubernetes, which is the ingress controller support. And that is the final part of the demo that we'll show next. So we'll hop back into the terminal, and what we're going to do is just blow away the Tailscale test that we have installed in the cluster that's using the service form of the Tailscale operator. And we're going to jump back over into my gists and pull down a different demo that is using the Tailscale Kubernetes operator ingress support. And so this is essentially the same set of manifests. It is targeting a different container image. It's not Nginx. This time it's actually a Tailscale test app written in Python. And this particular set of manifests has got an additional ingredient in there. It's now got an ingress specified. and you can see that the ingress is actually using an ingress class name of Tailscale. And so this is similar to what we had with the service annotation, except this time it is an ingress annotation. And that enables similar magic, which will enable the Tailscale operator for Kubernetes to detect that ingress and actually go and set up a Let's Encrypt certificate and a kind of L7 termination of this ingress through the Tailscale network. And so this is sort of the holy grail scenario for getting easy access to your Kubernetes cluster. So what I'm doing now is I'm just looking at the fact that I've got nothing, I've got no Nginx showing up, and I've still got my demo operator showing up. We've grabbed the manifest with the ingress demo, and so we're now going to apply that to the cluster. And you can see now 4 objects are created: the deployment, the namespace, the service, and the ingress. It's created that namespace, and if we have a look at everything in the namespace, this time we've got a similar set of objects, but if we also query for ingresses in that namespace, we now see an ingress that the Tailscale operator for Kubernetes has created. And you can see this has got nginx-test.mytailnet.ts.net. And this is essentially, again, an endpoint. This time it's terminated with TLS on port 443. And so if we come back to the browser and paste that URL in, making sure that we add the HTTPS prefix to the URL, which I'll just manually type in there. Now there's going to be a little bit of a delay while the Tailscale operator, under the covers, it's talking to Let's Encrypt and provisioning a certificate for me. And this is now showing the test site, and because I'm connected to the server over the tailnet, the Tailscale headers are actually present because Tailscale is proxying, and as a consequence, the server knows my address because it's coming from the Tailscale headers. And again, if I disconnect from the tailnet and refresh, I can no longer see the server because my iPad is no longer on my tailnet. And again, if I reconnect back to my tailnet, I can again see the cluster because it's on the tailnet. After a brief refresh, there. So there is a final cool thing that we can do, which is to use a thing called funnel, which is a capability in Tailscale to essentially publish a Tailscale endpoint directly out to the broader internet, which means that anyone can get to that endpoint. So I'm going to come into my manifest and I'm going to enable the funnel capability. And again, just by changing the Kubernetes manifest and adding this annotation of enabling the funnel capability, I can now apply that manifest to the cluster with the funnel capability turned on. And in theory, that would allow any browser to see that Kubernetes resource because Tailscale funnel is publishing it sort of to the broader internet. Now, if I just describe, having applied that change, if I describe the ingress, you can see now that it is added that capability. So I'm going to go back to the URL and just confirm that it's still responding, which it is. I'm now going to disconnect the tailnet and refresh the browser one more time. And here you would expect this to work because I've enabled funnel. And actually what I discovered is you can see here my terminal has lost its connection because I'm disconnected from the tailnet. So I have to reconnect back to the tailnet. And the thing I learned here is that I actually have to restart the deployment in Kubernetes. It doesn't actually pick up this enabling of funnel on the fly. So if we just restart the rollout, we should see the change to enable funnel take effect. And so we will do that. And now just make sure that the deployment has restarted. You can see that it actually needed a few more seconds, and now the pods are running again. So let's hop back and go to the browser. and make sure that we now refresh. There it is, it's working. We'll go and now disconnect from the tailnet. So the iPad is now just on the internet, is no longer on the tailnet. Hit refresh, and now we can still hit the Kubernetes cluster, but now the test site is basically saying there's no headers to tell me that you're on a tailnet, so I don't know who you are anymore. But with the magic of Tailscale funnel combined with the Tailscale operator for Kubernetes, I have the ability to expose simply services on my Kubernetes cluster, both to my Tailscale tailnet and also to the broader internet of devices not connected to my tailnet. And this is pretty spectacular. Well, thanks again for tuning into this video, and I really hope you enjoyed the demo. Thanks for sticking with it all the way to the end. If you are interested in learning more, please do go to the link that you can see linked on the screen right now. And that is a blog post write-up that I did to go along with the video. But thanks again for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.